right before this public lecture. So, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the IMS public lecture. This is the second public lecture in as many weeks organized by the Institute for Mathematical Sciences. The director of the Institute, Professor Louis Chen, sent his apology because he couldn't make it tonight because he is recovering from a knee operation. So he's now resting at home. So he asked me to stand in for him to chair tonight's session. Now, last week's public lecture was by Professor Massad on models for dengue fever. Tonight's lecture is entitled Real People, Virtual World, Watching the Plague Unfold. And I have great pleasure in introducing tonight's speaker, Professor Lina Pfefferman. Professor Pfefferman is an assistant research professor at the Center for Discrete Mathematics and Theoretical Computer Science at Rutgers University, and also the co-director of the Tufts University School of Medicine Initiative for the Forecasting and Modeling of Infectious Disease. Professor Pfefferman has very interesting background and excellent pedigree. In fact, she's the daughter of the Finnish novelist Charles Pfefferman, and so mathematics is in her blood. But she also wants to do something, doesn't want to follow exactly the footsteps of his father, and so after obtaining a bachelor and master's degree in mathematics, she studied for a PhD degree in biology. So she can now claim to be a mathematician, a biologist, as well as an epidemiologist. So she can wear many hats at one time. So she has been a consultant to the U.S. Department of Defense, Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, National Defense University, and has worked closely with the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, all in the areas of biodefense. So in tonight's talk, I think she's going to tell us a story about how scientists can learn from the virtual world of computer games about human behavior and how to prevent disease from spreading and so on. I think in particular, she's going to tell us an accidental outbreak in the world of Warcraft, which is a very popular game played by millions of players worldwide. And she's going to tell us some surprising and unexpected behavior of the players in playing those games. I think we couldn't have chosen a more appropriate topic for the public lecture because this story has received considerable media attention and have been covered by the BBC World News, the Associated Press, and so on. So I'm sure you all cannot wait to find out more about this story, so I'll hand over the time to Lina.
Thank you very much. Hey, I'm going to take a second and see if I can't actually put this on a clip. Can you hear me? Yes. Okay, wonderful. Thank you. All right, so tonight I'm going to try and convince you that gaming is actually a wonderful thing for behavioral epidemiologists. So just a quick poll in the room. How many people here are mathematicians? How many people here are epidemiologists? How many people in the room play Warcraft? Oh my God, why are you all here? Okay. All right, so hopefully this will not be, any of these three categories will be okay. So I will try and explain a little bit about each one and then talk about how they all come together. Okay, so the subtitle of my talk is Why Mathematicians Really Do Care What Your Warlock Blood Elf Does. Yeah, no one has a Warlock Blood Elf. See, I was thinking there would be gamers in the room. Okay. I speak very quickly, I know this. I'm terrible at knowing when to slow down. Please yell if I'm going too quickly. Thank you. Okay, first things first. What does an infectious disease epidemiologist do? Well, you analyze disease risks to a population. You look at the origin of existing outbreaks to determine how they began and how they spread. You look at which public health strategies are going to help prevent more outbreaks. And you look at which intervention strategies end already existing outbreaks, and when to announce an emergency. All of these kinds of questions are things that public health epidemiologists take care of. Practical epidemiologists are sort of like detectives. They call people, they track down the spread of disease, they get reports from hospitals, they talk to people who have experienced disease, they talk to the families of people who have experienced disease to try and figure out contact patterns, maybe if it's a foodborne illness, who ate what? Oh, thank you. It's an incredibly intense process. It requires a lot of man hours. It requires a few sick people, hopefully, not many sick people, because otherwise we've missed the boat. And it requires the cooperation of sick people and their families most of the time to do this effectively. That's itself a question of human behavior, and we're going to come back to human behavior in a bit. Okay, mathematical epidemiologists do something slightly different. What we do instead is to use mathematical expressions to try and predict and understand the nature of disease outbreaks, the disease dynamics, even when there isn't an outbreak. So we try and ask if and when outbreaks will happen, why particular outbreaks looked exactly the way that they did. There are a couple of different standard ways that this works, and I'm going to give you a quick introduction to all three. So there are compartmental models, network models, and agent-based models, which actually do reflect a little bit of the first two, but do it in a different way. And so we'll go through those, and we can represent almost all of them using pictures. So you don't have to be a mathematician to know what we do with these three things. So the first one is compartmental models. So what do? We decide people fit into compartments. Susceptible people fit into one compartment together. Infected people fit into a compartment together. And recovered or removed people fit into a compartment together. And then you can transition between compartments by becoming infected or recovering or dying. Right? I like interactive audiences. Head nodding is great. Wonderful. Okay, good. Okay, so then we consider these rates of moving from one compartment to another, and they're based on probabilities. And so we call the probability of exposure and infection from exposure together beta, and that's going to be the rate of moving from S to I. And we call the duration of illness and the probability of recovery gamma, and that's going to determine what the rate is of moving from I to R. Right? Very simple. Life is good. Thank you. Good head nodding. Okay, and so the picture tells a mathematical story. It's a very basic story. How do we know what the change per unit time is of S? Well, it's simply minus beta, the rate of moving from S to I, and then we assume that there's random homogeneous mixing, that everyone in S is going to bump into everyone in I at about the same rate. And so the number of infected people times the number of susceptible people times this rate tells us how many people move from S to I. Everyone still with me? Okay. Anyone want me not to slow down or go back or do something? Okay. All right, change in I does exactly the same thing. We have exactly the term only positive, because that's how many people moved in. And we subtract the number of people who recovered, which is exactly how many people were infected, times the rate of moving from infected to recovered. And then the change in recovery is just people moving into that compartment. So it's a very simple mathematical picture for this one. That doesn't mean that all compartmental models are simple. Well, we've got this one, which is a little bit more complicated, but you can see we can always represent it with these nice compartmental boxes and lines. This one's even more complicated. I just threw it up there because I always thought this was a beautiful picture. Somehow, someone designed this and it made sense to somebody. But don't worry about the details, but you can see it's not always as simple as it looks. This is still pretty simple. It gets worse and worse and worse. But from a biological perspective, the compartmental models give us a really easy thing to understand. They give us a curve for susceptible individuals over time, a curve for infected individuals over time. This is what the practical infectious disease epidemiologists monitor, incidence. And it gives us a way of seeing recovered over time. So I don't know if you guys can see these curves. This one starts pretty high, so it assumes a completely naive population. And then as people get infected, that goes lower, and finally it plateaus here when the outbreak dies out, and this is how many people stay susceptible. Here's the outbreak curve. It starts low, and as people get more and more infected, it peaks, and then they recover, and it goes down. And the recovery, people start, no one has ever been sick before, so they can't get recovered. And then it grows over time as the outbreak spreads and people are recovering, and then it plateaus. And once the outbreak has died out and everyone who's ever going to recover has recovered, then we've got that nice stable plateau. Everyone good? Okay, so these are the kinds of pictures that we hope for coming out of those incredibly complicated compartmental models. But a compartmental model has a basic inaccuracy. And here's what it is. It assumes that homogeneous random mixing. It assumes that everyone in the susceptible class, on average, meets about everybody from the infected class and vice versa. Right? And so you can correct for that a little bit. You can have more compartments for who meets whom when. But it really does, in order to get this, we borrowed it from physics, the mass action transfer term. In order to get that beta and that gamma, we really have to assume this homogeneous mixing. And in large enough populations, that's great. That's not actually inaccurate. But frequently we're looking at reasonably small populations that are definitely finite, and we actually do want some kind of differentiation. So what do we get? This leads us to network models. These next two pictures are shamelessly actually stolen from Lauren Ansel Myers, who does network epidemiology quite beautifully. So what we do is, here are the compartments from the compartmental model that you just saw, but we actually look at the individuals inside each compartment, and we set up a network. And these edges, these lines between the individuals and the network, are contacts. They're potential routes of transmission. Right? And so this tells us explicitly who contacts whom. Everyone still with me? Okay. These networks themselves can get quite complicated. Right? So here's one where we have households with varying numbers of people in them. And people within the household go to school, or a hospital, or a shopping center, or to work. Within the school, there are classrooms where people interact. So these network models themselves can get quite complex to try and reflect social interactions in reality as well. Okay, so how does the math work on these networks? Well, the basic idea is this. We take a look at the network, and we start by picking a guy. We pick that guy for purposes of today. And we know that guy has 4 contacts. So this guy, this guy, this guy, and this guy. Okay, one contact is already recovered. I believe pink was recovered and yellow is infected. One contact is infected, and 2 contacts are still susceptible. Right? If we still know the probability of infection from contact, then we know the probability of this guy getting infected from his contact, and the probability of him infecting his 2 contacts over time. Right? He can't do anything to the recovered guy. He's already recovered. Right? We assume immunity for him. We don't have to, but for right now we are. Okay? And so what we can do then is figure out, with these known contacts and these probabilities, what the average contact rate is between susceptibles and infected for the average guy. Right? And we compute the probabilities over time for this pattern of contacts, and that gives us our outbreak. Right? And again, this can get arbitrarily icky looking. But the concept is simple and beautiful. So notice that compartmental models and network models won't always agree with each other in terms of their outcome. And in fact, that's part of why we want both of them, because they give us an answer to slightly different things. So in the network, each individual infected guy has fewer susceptibles to potentially infect than in the compartmental version in this network. Right? This is going to depend on the network structure. If, in fact, everyone is contacting everyone else, if we have a complete graph, then it doesn't change anything from the compartmental model. So it can also depend on who starts the outbreak. An outbreak that starts where? An outbreak that starts for this guy might behave very differently from an outbreak that starts with this guy. Okay? Okay. I'm just going to assume it's okay until someone stops. All right. There's a third way that we basically model these things as mathematical epidemiologists. And those are agent-based or individual-based models. And these use computer simulations, and they create lots of individuals living together in an environment. And the environment can be spatial or not, and explicitly spatial or implicitly spatial, or blah, blah, blah. The people in the audience who already understand what that means don't need any more explanation, and the rest of you probably don't care. So, okay. They can move around the environment together. Each can have their own susceptibility to disease, and they interact with each other over time. So, effectively, they all run around together. They're bouncing around the environment. And it can, so that was one where everyone's sort of randomly running around. It can also be that if an infected individual, he's infected, meets an uninfected individual, these guys are all uninfected, that there can be disease transmission. So what does that look like? These guys meet up, and he successfully infected that guy. Okay? Okay. So notice that there are similarities between the agent-based models and the compartmental and the network models. So if everyone really does mix at random, kind of like that first slide where everyone was just running around like ping pong balls, then this is really quite like the compartmental model, where they're all mixing at random, and a susceptible individual has a probability, an equal probability of contacting any infected individual. In the second slide, where the two groups of people came together, that's much more like a network model, right? Where you could draw those contacts as edges, and then take away the temporal aspect of it, and that would be a network, right? Okay. So what do agent-based models do for us that the others don't? Well, usually in the other models we don't explicitly decide, in the agent-based models we don't explicitly decide when and where individuals will be. They can have goals of where they want to get to, or where they're going from, or tasks they need to accomplish in places, but we don't deterministically decide what everyone's doing. And in this way, we let the computer decide at random, or at least at pseudo-random, what individuals do when. And so this means that the models include a type of stochasticity that the others don't usually have. We can put it in to some of them, and it's complicated and rare. But this is a natural way of letting a computer simulation help us out and say, okay, well, what happens if we don't actually know everything? Or what's the range? What's the distribution of contacts over time if we assume the following kinds of behaviors? So far, so good? Okay. So what do all three types of these models have in common? They all include some kind of human behavior, guiding how the disease and infection is going to spread. And in the compartmental model, it's defined that everyone's mixing at random, right? That's a behavior. In the network model, the lines between individuals are contacts. That's a social behavior. That's a more strictly defined social behavior. In the agent-based models, the interactions happen at random, but when and how they happen defines who's exposed to disease and for how long. Right? So in all of these, whether explicitly or implicitly, there is some kind of definition of human behavior guiding how disease is transmitted. Right? That's because these are infectious disease models. God, I killed them. Okay, good. Okay. All right, so this finally brings us to the difficulty for all of this. Behavior is assumed in these models. As mathematicians and as mathematical epidemiologists, what we do is come to it and say, we've got these beautiful models of disease spread, as long as we know about how people behave. And then we assume this is about how people behave, and then it tells us what the disease spread should look like. Right now, we basically guess, which is fine, because we actually don't know that much else. Even if we were able to measure contact right now, and there are some beautiful studies that do this, especially the EpiSIMS and TransSIMS data out of what was Los Alamos National Labs in the US and is now a group at Virginia Tech. If anyone wants to look at that, I would happily recommend them. It's beautiful stuff. But it's daily behaviors right now. And it's somewhat natural to assume that as there's an outbreak of dangerous disease, if we start making sure that people know about it, which we could presumably want to do, that they would actually change their behaviors, especially behaviors associated with risk. Now, some people wouldn't, but hopefully some people would. So even if we could measure it completely right now, that doesn't give us a great idea of how people will behave under actual outbreak scenarios. So how do we begin to understand what people will do and what assumptions we should make in that case? So this was all leading up to how to figure this all out. Well, we could just ask people, what would you do if? Right? And there are behavioral studies that do this. This is actually quite a problem. People are bad at knowing the answer to what I would do if. And it's for a very good reason. A lot of these times, these aren't reasoned decisions. These are not rational decisions you're being asked to make. They're gut level, highly emotional decisions, and it's very hard to project the level of emotion that you would be experiencing. Infectious disease, this is my favorite thing about infectious disease. And I think I'm maybe one of the only people who thinks that this is the cool thing about infectious disease as opposed to other things. Infectious disease is one of the only things where a society at the moment, both the risk and the cure come in the form of social behavior. most of the time the risk, even when economists talk about common goods and uniting against a common risk, things like that, it's usually an external risk with an internal solution or an internal risk with an individual solution. Infectious disease is actually the kind of thing where being in a group means you can have access to health care and resources, but it's also the thing that causes you to be at risk. So that's a fundamentally unusual set of risks for humans. So it's hard to ask yourself with emotional reality, well, how scary does a disease have to be before you might be unwilling to risk infection to care for a sick child? Hopefully that disease had better be really, really scary at that point. When are you willing to forego seeking your own medical attention if you know you're going to infect a hospital? So all of these kinds of things, they're very hard to predict how you're going to feel accurately. They aren't easy questions, and they've got a huge impact on the outcome of mathematical models, as they should. All right, now we got to the fun part. So all of that was set up for why we would ever need World of Warcraft. Here's World of Warcraft. So in 2005, World of Warcraft had 6.5 million players worldwide. As of today, the count is over 9 million. For those of you who don't play, I'm going to introduce the game to you a little bit. Since that seems to be most of you, I think this is time well spent. All right, this is a town in the game. First of all, let me say that while the average gamer, we know from demographic studies, the average gamer worldwide is a 14 to 35-year-old male who is unmarried and not usually in a long-standing relationship. For World of Warcraft, yeah, seriously. I'm not making this up, it's great. For World of Warcraft, we actually get a very different demographic spread. For World of Warcraft, we actually do see people from all sorts of professions. Both sexes, men and women, are playing. Kids are playing. Working mothers are playing. Politicians are playing. It's kind of funny to watch. Soldiers. In the US right now, there is a large demographic at the US Army base in Iraq of soldiers who are playing this game. Which makes sense to me because honestly, if you're going to try and kill things, you may as well want them to be, you know, dragons. So we've got people from all socioeconomic walks of life, from all educational backgrounds, from all ethnicities really represented, both sexes, ages. It's a really good, diverse set. Not as diverse as we would love, because right, clearly we're missing all of you people, but it's quite good. All right, it's beautiful. It's just stunning. The artists who work on this game do a brilliant, brilliant job. The music in this game is specifically commissioned for different regions, and it's gorgeous. It's dramatic. As you go around the game, right, you've now just seen 4 or 5 captured screenshots. They're all very different. That's not because I chose specifically very different screenshots. It's just true. As you wander around this game, there is lots to explore. It's very easy to feel lost in the fantasy world of this game. It's complex. There are lots of different modes of transportation. So behind this floating hammerhead shark and this lady, this thing is actually a transport. It's a tram. You get on it with your friends and it takes you to different portions of the world. It has characters from many races. Yeah. I'm not even going through what these guys are. But these are your options. So as you log into the game to create your character, these are some of your options. They're not even all of your options. They're just some of your options. So we have internal game diversity and demographic distribution. It has world events. There's a lunar festival in the game. I think it's only once a year, when all regions of the game celebrate a full moon. You can see there are fireworks and there are floating barges, and this is clearly this is from one of the port cities. I don't remember which, but this happens all over the world, and there's literally a massive celebration. And there's New Year's. It's highly social. You go to a bar and drink with your friends who happen to be bulls, really. But you really do congregate in this way, and it's not just for the purpose of accomplishing something in the game in the way a traditional computer game would be, that you have to go through a number of steps and doing blah, blah, blah. It's really quite social. So I haven't shown you an image right here, but Each of these avatars in the game is programmed to be able to dance a certain number of different moves. So you have dance parties randomly breaking out in the game. It's very strange if you've never seen it before, but highly worthwhile. I suggest checking it out. As part of being highly social, you explore in groups. So as you explore the world, I don't know if you guys can see this. These are night elves riding saber-toothed tigers, essentially, around together. Can you guys see these things? Okay, good. I was worried for a minute that I was focusing on lots of pictures you couldn't see. Okay, so people form what are called parties. And these can be long-term, stable social groups that accomplish things within the game together. You can ride public transportation together. This is the Goblin Zeppelin. Here's a nice little goblin looking at the Goblin Zeppelin up in the air. This is like the tram I showed you a couple slides ago. This is a means of getting around the world. You face challenges together. So if you're going to go fight a monster, frequently you go in a party. If you're going on a quest, you go in a party. Frequently these monsters and quests can't be performed by one individual alone, no matter how powerful within the game that individual is. You need a diversity of skill sets, and you need some kind of coordinated response that you practice over time with your party. So it's a very strong bond. These things can last years. You wouldn't want to meet this guy alone. He's an ogre guarding the store. He's pretty strong. So people develop very long-lasting group friendships, and they rely on each other for months or years of gameplay together like this. And there will be external to the game communication as well, but it's a very strong internal bond. Or it can be. There are people who play and aren't into that also, and you can be isolated, but it's rare. Okay, in 2005, here's where the epidemiology part starts. So that's the close of that's World of Warcraft, guys. For the first time in an online game, there was an accidental plague in World of Warcraft. Now, there had been introduced purposeful plagues before in different games, but this was the first time that it was accidental, and it was very, very cool to watch. So here's what happened. A new area was open for high-level players. Blizzard, the company that makes World of Warcraft, is actually very good at this. When too many people get to be the highest possible level and the game might start getting boring for them, they open up a new region of the game and raise the cap on how powerful you can get. And that region of the game is pretty much exclusively for those very high-level players. Now, in the context of these games, high level means a number of things. It means your ability to inflict damage on others, and your ability to withstand damage inflicted on yourself, among other things. Uh-oh, we've got a high-level player back there, apparently. Okay, so in this new area for high-level players was a new monster. And he was large and beautiful in an ugly way, and he was brutal to fight. You needed a group of high-level players to fight him. And as part of the challenge of fighting him, he infected you with a disease called corrupted blood. And this was a proximity-based, if there are any gamers even of not World of Warcraft in the room, this was an area effect spell. Nope, no gamers. Okay. Here's the monster. He's Hakar. He's really quite beautiful. There's no player in this screen because this is a player perspective screenshot of him. This is what you would see if you were playing him. But if you had a player, he would stand to about that height. He's a giant, and he's just beautiful. And here's where things didn't go as planned. So far, that was what Blizzard wanted to happen. If you were a high enough player to fight Hakar, to get to fighting Hakar, because you had to get through other things with your party to get to him, corrupted blood really was unlikely to kill you. It would be annoying, and it would be an added challenge to fighting him, but it wasn't going to actually kill you. However, the higher level players didn't necessarily wait the way the game designers had meant for them to, until either they cured themselves of the disease and killed Hakar, or Hakar just killed them, which meant they weren't carrying the disease anymore either. Right? Those were the two outcomes that the game developers intended. But the high-level players didn't know that, and so some of them gave up on the fight with Hakar and left. And they went back to urban centers, like this one. Instantly, because it's an area effect spell that sticks to you, once you caught corrupted blood, you yourself had no control over casting corrupted blood as a spell, so it's a truly secondary transmission infectious disease. You had no control over casting it. And you can see here, this is part of what's announced on the screen to the player, corrupted blood drains 263 to 337 damage every 2 seconds, spreads to nearby allies. Right, so that's the in-game description of what's happening. And I don't know if you guys can see this specifically, but there are characters exploding in little clouds of blood all over the screen. That's corrupted blood. I'm going to show you a video of it in a few minutes. And these skeletons on the ground in an urban area are very unusual. Most of the time, in order to see these skeletons on the ground, you have to be out of an urban center in the middle of combat. So this is actually the equivalent to that scene from Monty Python dealing with the Black Death and Bring Out Your Dead. This is quite dramatic in the game. This doesn't normally happen. Public gathering places were instantly devastated. This is an alehouse, and you can see there's almost no one left. There's a little gnome that died. It's quite something. Okay, so one very creative player made a very humorous documentary. But not only am I going to show it to you because I think it's funny, but also because it's going to give you a very good sense of what it was like in this game to experience this. And you'll see it's quite dramatic.
You want to off the lights?
Can we do that?
It would be easier for us to see.
Cool. So I'm also not sure how big I can make the screen before it will get fuzzy, so we might have to play with that a bit. Let's see if this works. Thank you. Perfect. So he's the hero of the story. Thank you. Perfect. So you can see people are running around all in aimless directions, exploding in blood. It has a very dramatic sound effect associated. There's some screaming once in a while. This is a city square. I guess we went backwards there for a minute. So here's a guy who's just standing on the steps telling people about it. So he acted as a storyteller while it was happening. So this is a transcription of the little text so that the person watching the video can read it. And you can see there are animals running around at the same time as the players. And this is going to get very loud, I think. Yeah, because he changes the music just a bit. Right, so... Oh, it's actually not as terrible as I thought it would be. Thank you. Okay, so as you can tell, his decision after making this movie, or at least in part of making this movie, was to demonstrate running away. And you can see he's not alone. The guy in the saber-toothed cat just passed him. Undercity was an unaffected city in the game. The plague hadn't spread to Undercity. And this is the name of the character who made the movie. So, thank you. Perfect. So hopefully that gives you a good sense of what it was like in this game to experience this plague. It was dramatic. I think it was quite cool. Okay, so what about this accidental plague looked like the real world? Because clearly, even in the real world, as bad as things like Ebola could be, we don't actually get that. So what did we do? First of all, it originated from an animal in a remote and uninhabited jungle region. Great, we have a zoonotic infection. It was carried by travelers to urban centers. Also pretty good. It had both human and animal hosts, and they passed infection back and forth to each other, sustaining the outbreak. So if you just cured yourself, that was no good if your pet, your saber-toothed tiger or your battle hawk or whatever, I think there are giant lizards you can have as well. No good if they also got it. You have to cure both of you because otherwise you would pass back and forth. So this was the equivalent of an SIS infection. You couldn't be immune to it at the time. It was spread from infected to susceptible individuals by close spatial contact. So this is sort of a droplet or close aerosolized transmission disease. And there were asymptomatic carriers. So this is a little bit of a lie. But let me talk to you about this, because this, I think, is one of the very coolest pieces of this story. The NPCs. This is in-game lingo for non-player characters. These are individuals that look like characters in the game, but are really computer constructs coded by Blizzard to help gameplay move along. They're shopkeepers who sell you gear. They are people who wander around telling you about quests. They're people who have pieces of information for quests to succeed. Right? So they're crucial for continued, oh, thank you. They're crucial for continued seamless gameplay. Now, in World of Warcraft, players can kill other players can kill monsters, players can try their best to kill NPCs. And you can kill an NPC, but it's incredibly difficult. And one of the reasons is that Blizzard thought about it and said, well, if too many NPCs get killed, gameplay will be disrupted. You don't want your NPCs to get killed, right? So no matter how malicious your player base is, no matter how much they really love to go around killing all of your goblin storekeepers, you really don't want that. So they made them very robust. What this meant was that although they were coded as characters, so they could get corrupted blood, it wouldn't kill them. And they wouldn't cure themselves from it. They would just not die of it. Which meant that no matter what happened, they were standing around city centers continuously infecting anyone who had just been cured. Right. So this is actually one of the things where people sort of ask me after I've done this analysis, wasn't this a mistake of Blizzard to let this happen? And I actually think no. I think that you would have had to have been a superhuman genius to have thought, well, I don't know, what happens if corrupted blood gets out of Zul'Grub area near Hakkar and hits an NPC? I think that would have been a superhuman leap of logic. But it's still very cool. Okay. Okay, so what does this look like from an epidemiological perspective? So here is sort of a compartmental model that's very precise about what, so Zul'Grub was the high player area that they opened where Hakkar lived. And what this is doing is showing you both the connections to the different groups that were susceptible, but also it's broken down by whether it was intentional spread or unintended spread from the perspective of the game designers. So we started with Hakkar. And Hakkar was supposed to directly spread his disease to characters involved in fighting Hakkar. That's supposed to happen. They were supposed to be able to spread it to their pets. That was supposed to happen also, because that's part of the challenge. Your pet can help you fight your monster, so your pet should also be infected. So these three guys, so Hakkar could also directly infect your pets. So these three guys were intentional. Then we get to the unintended spread. The involved characters left and infected NPCs, and the uninvolved characters, the lower level characters who weren't in Zul'Grub. Pets also ran around infecting NPCs and uninfected characters. And it took a while for people to figure out that the pets were still infecting the NPCs. It was pretty obvious when the pets were infecting the lower level characters. It took people a while to figure out how the NPCs were getting it. And this is a complicated picture of how infection continued. This is non-trivial. The plague quickly spread out of control, as you saw from the video. Whoops. Blizzard tried to impose a quarantine, but it was a voluntary quarantine. They actually said, they put an in-game announcement, okay, people, this area of the game is infected. Please, if you're in this area of the game and you have corrupted blood, don't leave. And it failed. People didn't listen. So it quickly spread. Right, there's a shock. And so you get this scene of utter ridiculous devastation that you would never, ever see in a city center in normal World of Warcraft play. Finally, Blizzard just halted the plague and reset their servers. So we can't really do that in real life. But did we learn anything? So how did players behave during the plague? Was it close to how people behave during real-world epidemics? Somewhat surprisingly, yes. Yes, it really was. So we saw some impressive altruism. We saw lower-level players or high-level players willing to be reinfected over and over again in order to cast healing spells on low-level players to let them sort of get through. Now, death in World of Warcraft is not permanent. I should make that known, but it's costly. It's annoying. Your weapons degrade and your armor degrades and you can lose money and it's inconvenient to die. But we saw some altruism. We saw some real courage. People running into places ahead of other people saying, actually people with corrupted blood are coming and I don't have it yet and you guys should log off. Logging off of the server is a good equivalent of running away. Right? You can take your character out of the world until it's all over. We saw compliance. When Blizzard said, okay, here's a quarantine, it's not just that everyone ignored it. The vast majority of players actually stayed. They complied with it. We saw fear. We saw emails and postings to the World of Warcraft bulletin board saying, what is going on? Who knows? Is this something that's supposed to be happening? Did Blizzard plan this on purpose? If my character dies and I lose a lot of money, is Blizzard going to recompense my character? What's going on? So we actually saw kind of a first pass of like, whoa, what is going on, and just confusion. And then there was all-out real concern and fear for your player characters on the message boards that were posted at the time. There was suspicion. There was a lot of worry that there had been that this was a purposeful infection that was supposed to be a game event. The same way that the Lunar Festival I showed you a picture of was supposed to be a game event. There was a lot of suspicion among the players that this was actually something that Blizzard had introduced on purpose to make it a cohesive picture. There was public concern, obviously. There was non-compliance. There were the people who left the quarantine zones. There was opportunism. There were people who were offering to heal lower-level characters because in the game, if you are a healer, the more you get to practice your healing spells, frequently the better you get as a healer. So if you were a high-level healer and you wanted an easy way to level up even more, even faster, standing in a crowded city center and being like, I'll heal you back up was a great way to do that. We saw maliciousness. In games, I don't know if anyone plays other games, this is called griefing. No? Okay. Well, maliciousness. We saw people purposefully infecting other people and just saying like, oh, this will be cool. I'll just get lots of people sick because it'll look cool and cause havoc. And we even saw curiosity. This is the one that surprised me a lot. In the news coverage, I ended up unfortunately calling this the stupid factor, which I think is somewhat of a misnomer. But what it was that players, so we talked about these parties, these long-term groups of stable friend relationships. These guys frequently have each other's emails offline. What we saw were flurries of emails posted within the Blizzard system saying, you're not logged on, you're missing it, there's something cool happening. Log on, take a look really fast, don't get infected, and log off, and you've got to log on and see this. And so there were people who were willing to undertake that risk in order to satisfy their curiosity. Not knowing quite how infectious the disease was, not knowing quite what the risk was, but knowing something was going on. We had people who were encouraging that, and people who were doing it. A lot of people did that. A lot of people also did the fear thing and just logged off their character and didn't log back in until it was over. So, but this one surprised me. As an epidemiologist, you sort of think about all of these things, right? If you're raised in epidemiology and you've taken courses, people tell you at some point to consider each of these kinds of behaviors. No one had ever said to me to consider curiosity. But I think now that I've seen it in the game, I'm going to have to. And I think that's a great thing. I think already, if I learned nothing else ever from World of Warcraft or any game like this, this is a great take-home message already for me, that there was an aspect of human behavior that could, of course, drastically affect how efficacious a public intervention is, or will be in an outbreak scenario. I'd never thought of that behavior. Breaking in to take a look and then trying to get out. Right? When we talk about public health quarantines being imposed, we always worry about compliance of people who don't want to enter the quarantine zone initially and then try and get out once they're there. Instantly, as soon as I saw this, I was like, this is going to become a frat stunt. To get into your fraternity, you're going to have to break into the quarantine zone, steal something, and get back. That's going to really affect whether or not your quarantine works. Oh, and yes, by the way, we really do see maliciousness in real life. So a lot of the response that I've gotten to the paper that I published on this so far has criticized it because of the maliciousness, saying, look, in a game people understand there's really not that much to lose, so they're going to be willing to cause havoc just for havoc's sake, but in the real world they would never do that. That's actually, unfortunately, not true. We've got at least two well-known examples. So Patient Zero from the AIDS epidemic in the early 80s of the US, and Typhoid Mary, also from the US. Neither of these people actually have to be behaving maliciously. It doesn't have to be that they're going, ah, I can infect all of you people. It's that they have something real to lose if they behave more cautiously. So Patient Zero really enjoyed a very active sex life and didn't want to lose that. And Typhoid Mary was a cook. And if she was not acting as a cook, she would lose her livelihood. So she tried a couple of times to actually find gainful employment not as a cook, couldn't do it, went back to cooking and killing people with typhoid. Knowing full well that that was what was going to happen. But it doesn't have to be malicious in order for it to be the equivalent of maliciousness. So what we really have to do is learn how to balance the differences in those behaviors that we see and the difference in the frequencies. So can we learn from what we saw? I really think so. Is it going to be all we need to know? Absolutely not. But is it a good place to start? Yeah. People do behave differently when death is temporary. No question about it. But death is temporary, but it is a serious in-game event. And we're talking about a game that not everyone, but a large portion of players dedicate a very large portion of their lives to. There are gamers for whom it is routine to play 40 or 50 hours a week. That's not unusual at all. So we're talking about people who are spending the equivalent of a 9-to-5 job at Warcraft. There are people whose job actually is Warcraft. If you are willing to make this your full-time thing, you can easily make a very decent salary playing up characters and selling items for real-world cash in the game. Oddly enough, demographically distributed, most of the people who actually play for their livelihood are in Southeast Asia. So people form very strong social bonds, and even though that's a game world, the social bond itself is a very real one. If you've been playing for 8 months with your party, and you suddenly do something that will cause everyone else in your party to die, that's a break of trust in a very real way, even though death is temporary. That's still breaking a very strong social taboo. So, and of course, only some people are gamers, so we do have to figure out whether or not non-gamers would behave in the same way. But as I said, with World of Warcraft, we have a better diversity than we would expect. Certainly not the best, but good. So I think for all of these reasons, we will be able at some point to take lessons from this that are very meaningful for human behavior and apply them to real-world scenarios and know, of course, in our hearts that they won't directly apply, but it gives us a way to start thinking about it in the same way that now thinking about curiosity will affect how I do my modeling of disease in the future in the real world. So where do we go from here? So first thing, I want to design more in-game disease events. And I'm actually negotiating with a couple of different companies, including Blizzard, but not only Blizzard, to do that. And it may not always have to be a deadly plague. Part of what I think is really fascinating about these questions is, how do people assess disease risks? Is it a very different behavior if you think it's deadly as opposed to really, really inconvenient for only a week? So study reactions to see if there are some we haven't thought of yet. So like curiosity. Do we just see because there are now 9 million players, do 3 of them think of something I haven't thought of? As me personally. And that's not so unlikely. I'm creative, I'm not that creative. There are 9 million of them out there. Someone's got to think of something new. Study whether or not people's reactions can change based on disease parameters, rumors, public health announcements. These are all things that are easy to do in the game. And if we had a series of well-controlled in-game events, changing little things each time, it might be something very interesting to see, how do these things affect? So in a way that we don't have in the real world at all, people in the game actually get a really good understanding of what a disease parameter is, right? We saw that little panel, corrupted blood deals 267 to 330, blah, 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 right? People in the real world, no clue how likely these things are, even if they read the statistics, right? There are still lots of people who are very good at understanding rational, logical arguments, who are still much more afraid to fly than they are to cross the street, even though they know statistically they're much more likely to die being hit by a car than falling out of the sky in an airplane. right? So figuring out how people react, even when they've got very good assessments of risk, and figuring out how that changes, could itself already help what I think of as behavioral epidemiology a lot. And I'd like to study what affects risk perception. So even if you keep the same risk, and you try altering rumors or public health announcements, one of the things I think would be great for this is if we just study the timing of when the game developers make an announcement about what's happening. By the way, guys, there's this world event. Don't panic, or do panic, and see whether or not the timing, off by, 3 hours of rumors, really does change how people behave. So won't this ruin gameplay? That's another big one that I've gotten from lots of gamers. Wait a minute, I play this game to have fun. I don't play this game so I can be your guinea pig. So I actually don't think this is going to ruin gameplay at all. But I'm biased. But here's my argument. So there are already major portions of the game that are specifically designed to negatively impact a player's health. Right? If you want to go fight a dragon, it's not because that dragon has no risk of killing. It's that you want something at the end. You want to accomplish the advancement of your character. You want to feel like a group as though you've accomplished something with your party. You want to gain the extra special magic armor that the dragon is carrying and will only give you if you kill it. These are all things that you can associate with careful design to getting a cure for a disease, or building a hospital, or some kind of communal defense to disease risk as well. And so it's just going to be a question, I think, of researchers working very carefully with game developers to seamlessly integrate these sorts of things into the game. And a lot of these games are set in sort of a fantasy reality of about the Middle Ages, where most people already have an idea of disease prevalence. When you ask people to characterize the Middle Ages, one of the first 10 things they will always say is going to be plague. And so I think that it actually could add a depth to the game that players are already primed to accept as part of this kind of existence. So if we learn all these things about behaviors, what do we get to do? Well, then we get to go back to the models that we talked about at the very beginning and now make informed assumptions. So I'm not proposing that we use these games as disease simulators. I think that's been something else some people are confused about what I'm proposing. No, I don't think that the best way to prepare for pandemic flu is actually going to be to release some flu-like thing in World of Warcraft and see what happens from disease spread perspective. We know, though, as mathematical epidemiologists, we've got some very good tools how to predict disease spread once we understand human behavior. What we've traditionally been just terrible at is this human behavior aspect. And so that's what I think these are going to be fantastic virtual laboratory environments for testing. And so the moral of my story, yes, gaming can help save the world. And so this was work that I did in collaboration with my student, Eric Lofgren, who's brilliant. This is the citation for the paper that originally discussed this. I should note for you also that this exact same world phenomenon in World of Warcraft was analyzed in an incredibly similar paper that was submitted and published in parallel with ours by a man named Ron Balicer from Israel in the journal Epidemiology. And I encourage you also to find that. I didn't think to put the citation there, but it's a great paper, mainly because he agrees with me, so of course it's good. But my very, very great thanks also to all of you for listening, and to IMS and NUS for inviting me. I had a wonderful time here. Thank you.
Thank you, speaker, for a very interesting talk. We can field some questions.
Can I ask, in the AB model, do you model the people as gas particles and following a Brownian motion and doing some measures entropy as well?
So there definitely are models that have looked at random mixing with Brownian motion diffusion. I have never written such a one, but I believe that most of them do have characterizations of entropy, or at least of velocity as relates to pressure of volume or something like that. But yeah, when in the compartmental, I'm assuming you mean in the compartmental mixing models.
Actually, I'm referring to the AB one.
So most of the time in the agent-based models, it's not just that people are running around truly at random. Most of the time, there's some kind of directed purpose. So it looks like Mike would like to answer that.
Yeah, so one of the uses, for example, in agent-based models is in sexually transmitted infections, where you actually model how people select their partners. So it's when you know something about the contact and human behavior involved, then you actually put it into an agent-based model because you have that resolution. So one of the other key projects that my collaborator and myself are working on is that we're modeling the hospital environment. We have very fixed rules about how different agents within the hospital behave, like a doctor sees patients, a nurse attends to patients, and patients behave in another way, and so forth.
So yeah, exactly as Mark said, you assume something about the goals that an individual wants to achieve, and then it's the coincidence of their spatial environment that causes transmission. So the thing about the particles really comes into play more with assumptions of interaction rates for compartmental models when you have a spatial structure. Yeah?
Did you manage to get data from Blizzard?
What a great question. Okay, so here's the tragedy of this all. When this outbreak happened, I actually did call Blizzard and said, "Can I have your data? What are you logging? I'd love it." And they went, "Are you crazy? It's a bug. We're trying to fix it. We're not keeping any of this." So there is no data from this plague in the way that we would want. There's no quantitative assessment of who behaved in which ways and how the disease spread like that. But so that's true of historical outbreaks for a lot of real-world epidemiology as well. So what we did, as you saw in some of what I was telling you, is to go back and look at the message boards and treat those as though they were newspaper reports, and to talk to individual players and treat them as though they were giving historical anecdotal information in order to reconstruct what was going on, and also personal experience. I mean, I actually have a character in World of Warcraft, and my collaborator is a much more dedicated gamer than I will ever be. He and his whole party were logged on for the beginning of the outbreak, which is how actually I found out about it. He called me, he was like, we'd been joking about doing something like this a couple weeks before it happened. And so as soon as he started seeing it, he called me instantly and he said, "You know that thing that was a joke? Well, it's actually happening." And so that's when I got on the phone. So no, unfortunately, there was no real data to get at that point. But there was about as much data as most of the, let's say, cases from the 1918 flu pandemic report. We know death. We don't know a particular time of death, but we know about how many people died on which servers. But that's not really what we want to know from this. So we relied mostly on anecdotal stuff. It's a good question.
So based on the whatever information you managed to get, do you see phenomena that completely break previous models?
Well, so in this case, the transmissibility of the disease, because it was an area effect spell, was based solely on the density of characters occupying a city area. And so there was no, in epidemiology, what we would call R0, there was no realistic R0, because you can infect 1,000 other individuals at once if they were all crowded in. Because in this game, individuals don't have physical mass. You can run through another player with no particular problem. So we weren't even really looking at the epidemiology of it as disease spread with comparison to the real world. We were looking at the phenomena that drove it for comparison. And those, as we discussed a little bit, were very realistic. But the actual outbreak itself, we could see the spatial spread being quite realistic. The time of spatial spread was pretty good, assuming that you correct for rates of transportation. That was pretty good. But nothing else would really correlate appropriately to even chat. So you had a question?
I think the same question. I wanted to know how many hours per week you play. How you learned about this outbreak there, because I don't know if you playing if you learned about this outbreak.
Yeah, so I have to admit, this is the shame of all of this. I am not a very dedicated player. So I have an account and I play maybe an hour a week, maybe, which to a really serious gamer is obscene. I don't even count as a gamer. But the real way that we found out about this outbreak was Eric, my collaborator, because he is a serious player. So my guess is that he averages at least 30 hours a week on this game, which doesn't interfere with his work as a graduate student at all.
So there's not really any data which really shows whether groups kind of split up because one of the groups, as you had on one of your slides, and I talked about it before, that it was
yeah, so actually,
let's say if you play off cluster, you come in and infect the whole group, there's actually no example that this really happened. That
Well, so that's
afterwards when the game restarted, you are no longer part of our group, go away.
That's a really great question. So this happened so quickly that I don't think there was time for ostracism. But we did see on message boards incredible bitterness about people entering guilds. So guilds are sort of super parties. So your party are the people you explore with. Guilds are people that you interact with very frequently and share the spoils of your victories communally, and think of it as sort of a club. Think of it as a club. So there were posts to message boards of people who were incredibly bitter that members of their guild had entered the guild hall while infected. So we did see that social tension and breach of trust, but we didn't see what you were suggesting, which was ostracism of, are you crazy, you're in here, get out of here. But I think that's because this all happened so quickly that by the time you walked in, you'd already infected everybody. So we saw that betrayal of trust feel, but we didn't see ostracism. But I think if we slowed it down, I think we would have. I think we really would have seen that. Mm-hmm.
And another game about this game, since I don't know it, but you mentioned alehouses.
Yes.
How long does the average hangover last in the game?
Believe it or not, it's dependent on your level. How unfair is that? But yes,
That's basically life, I would say.
good point. Good point. Yeah, please.
Ina, how would you classify the spreading of corrupt blood from the model perspective? Is this a random mixing model? Would be
No, I don't think so. I think
sexually transmitted?
no, unless we've got incredibly promiscuous players. No, I think that this really is a spatial model. Yeah, because what we were seeing was purely spatially driven. So I would think that in terms of the mixing within a given space, that it was a random mixing model, but that we would need to incorporate heterogeneity of the density of infectants per space in order to really capture it. But yeah, that's a great question. Mark, then
It's just a comment. There's a nosocomial infection in reverse. No, because the interesting thing in the nosocomial infections, there's a vast heterogeneity of host susceptibility, which is what you have here.
Okay, I see what you're saying. Sure, but.
Sorry, just kidding.
Okay, no, it's cool. Huh?
So when one person with corrupted blood infects people around him, right? So the amount of damage that is caused to different people in his surrounding, is it uniform or is it?
No, that's another great question. So this also scaled with level, but unfortunately the frequency increased the lower your level was and the fewer protective spells you had. But the amount of damage went down. So the amount of damage it did per unit time went up, but the amount of damage it did in each round of inflicted damage went down. So it's complicated, but it's not uniform. Please.
You mentioned perhaps running some more experiments on games.
Mm-hmm.
Have you thought of doing something like Second Life, where you might get a better demographic?
That's a great question. I actually approached Second Life for exactly this purpose, and they were very sweet, and they said no. But they have a good reason. So Second Life actually, as part of their shtick, it's an endogenously created society. And so they're very unwilling to put in anything that would be worldwide, that's exogenous, that they themselves as the developers would impose. So they were lovely in suggesting that within the game I could design an infectious process and then get people to sign up for the experiment and do it. But I think already by the time that you're willing to sign up for this experiment, that's already making it very tenuous. And there's no such thing at all as death in Second Life. And even cost is a very weird thing to try and mimic because there's no end goal. And unless we're talking monetary cost, unless it's, I never remember what the money unit is in Second Life. Yeah, it's something reasonable. So that we could actually do, but that's actually, I think we'd have to get into some real ethics questions because you can use real world money to buy Second Life dollars. So we'd actually be costing people real world money. I think at that point it would be very contentious to run this. But Second Life would be great for the demographic spread. But unfortunately, for very good reasons of staying true to their ideal, they aren't that interested. Okay.
Are there any more questions? Okay. I think it's not often the case that lectures can be fun. But
Well, hopefully you guys have fun. I certainly had a lot of fun doing this research. This is, I mean, most of the time when you do infectious disease epidemiology, there are pictures of people suffering and separating sores and god-awful things. Here I had it works. It was nice.
So let's thank Professor Festerman again for very as a token of appreciation, the Institute has wanted to send a gift, a souvenir to
thank you.
I didn't pay for it, it's on the courtesy of IMS.
Oh, my thanks to you and to IMS. Thank you. I'm sure it's lovely.